Time to dig up the main ideas. I'm Sparky, and we're about to fetch a quick summary of Guardians of the Coast, exploring littoral forests, seagrass meadows, and coral reefs. Belize is world-renowned for its sprawling rainforests and massive barrier reef, but nestled between these iconic landscapes lies one of the country's most overlooked and rarest ecosystems, the littoral forest. Despite being vital to coastal health, littoral forests represent the smallest habitat area in Belize, covering less than 1% of the total land surface. You will not find these forests deep inland or in the high-altitude Maya Mountains. Instead, they are strictly coastal, hugging the mainland shores and taking root on the various cais that dot the Caribbean Sea. Because they occupy such a narrow strip of land, they are incredibly vulnerable, yet they serve as a critical bridge between the terrestrial and marine worlds. To understand a littoral forest, it helps to imagine a miniature version of the majestic broadleaf rainforests seen elsewhere in the country. While they share some of the same species and high density, littoral forests lack the extreme height and soaring canopies of their inland cousins. In the deep jungle, trees can reach staggering heights, but here, the salt spray, wind, and sandy soils keep growth in check. Most trees in this zone top out at about 30 to 40 feet. This gives the forest a thick, scrubby, and incredibly dense appearance. It is a world of topwood plants and salt-tolerant vegetation that has evolved specifically to survive where other plants would wither under the constant barrage of sea breeze and saline conditions. One of the most fascinating aspects of the littoral forest is its role as a transitional bridge. If you were to travel from the inland savannas toward the coast, you would see the landscape slowly shift in a beautiful biological progression. It is a blend where the open, grassy savanna begins to merge with traditional broadleaf species, eventually becoming the specialized Kai littoral forest we see on the islands. This transition is highly dependent on two specific factors: soil type and elevation above sea level. These forests are not just randomly placed. They depend on the slightly higher, well-drained ridges of the islands and mainland coastlines to thrive. When you explore locations like the Placencia Peninsula, the Monkey River area, or the beach barriers at northern and southern lagoons, you are seeing this coastal littoral forest in action. On the larger islands, such as Ambergris Cay, Kai Kalker, or the Turnef Atoll, the forest takes on a unique character. Here, you will find species like the sapodilla tree. This tree is famous for its incredibly dense, heavy wood, and for providing the chicle once used as the primary base for chewing gum. You might also spot the gumbo limbo, along with other hardy species that have adapted to the coastal lifestyle. These
That is a great point to clarify for our listeners. Kai and Ki are actually two different spellings for the exact same geographical feature, a small, low-elevation island situated on a coral reef.
While Key is the standard spelling used in the United States, such as the Florida Keys, K is the traditional spelling used in Belize and throughout much of the Caribbean. Both terms are pronounced identically and refer to the sandy environments where these resilient forests grow. Now, let's continue with our look at the progression of plant life in these coastal zones.
These are followed by littoral thickets, which are usually less than 6 feet high. Over time, as the soil stabilizes and the environment matures, these thickets grow into the dense, protective littoral forests we see today. They are the first line of defense between the land and the sea, standing as quiet guardians of the Belizean coast.
Littoral forests might be the smallest habitat in Belize, covering less than 1% of the land, but their role as a defensive shield is immense. You can think of these forests as the coast's first line of defense against the raw power of the Caribbean Sea. Their primary function is to protect the integrity of the land itself, especially during extreme weather. When a hurricane strikes, bringing with it massive surges and overwash events, the littoral vegetation acts as a physical buffer. The dense growth of trees and shrubs absorbs the energy of the crashing waves, slowing down the water as it moves inland. This process is vital for reducing what experts call sight loss, which is essentially the island or coastline being washed away into the ocean. Without these forests, many of the keys would simply vanish under the pressure of a major storm. The protection offered here isn't just about stopping big waves, it is also about managing the quiet, constant threat of erosion. The littoral zone features a dense carpet of salt-tolerant plants that stifle the effects of wind and water. For example, we see protection against sheet and rill erosion, which are the types of soil loss caused by heavy rainfall.
While the leaves and branches break the fall of the rain, the real magic happens underground. The root systems, or rhizomes, of these coastal plants weave together to form a tight, stable network that anchors the sandy soil in place. This is especially important for strand vegetation, which includes the first plants to appear on recently cleared beaches. Species like the beach morning glory spread across the sand, sending down roots at intervals to create a living net that keeps the beach from blowing away or sliding into the sea. This natural stability is far superior to human-made solutions. We often see coastal resorts trying to expand their footprint by dredging sand from the bottom of the ocean to fill in their beaches for weddings or recreation. However, nature has a way of taking back what is hers. Without the complex root systems of littoral forests to hold that new sand in place, the sea eventually reclaims it. Furthermore, these forests protect the land from the salt spray that would otherwise kill less hardy vegetation further inland. By acting as a salt spray barrier and a windbreak, the littoral forest creates a stable environment where more sensitive species can thrive. This protection extends to the residents of these areas too, providing a safer, more stable coastline for human communities. Protecting these forests isn't just about saving a few trees. It is about maintaining a self-repairing breakwater that sustains the very ground we stand on. As we move into the heart of the littoral zone, you will notice that this environment functions like a mini rainforest, though it has its own distinct rules for survival. While it shares some species with the broadleaf forests found further inland, the trees here rarely grow taller than 30 to 40 feet. This stunted growth is a direct result of the harsh coastal conditions, yet the vegetation remains incredibly dense and specialized. The defining characteristic of littoral flora is salt tolerance. These plants have adapted to thrive in sandy, nutrient-poor soil while enduring constant salt spray from the Caribbean Sea. One of the most iconic trees in this zone is the sapodilla. Known for its incredibly dense and heavy wood, the sapodilla is the source of chicle, which was historically used to make chewing gum. Alongside it, you will often find the gumbo limbo tree and the sea grape. The sea grape is particularly easy to identify by its thick, waxy, circular leaves and clusters of edible fruit that can be used to make juice. These waxy coatings are not just for show, they are a vital adaptation that prevents the plants from losing precious fresh water to the drying effects of the salt and wind. Closer to the shoreline, the ground is often covered in a dense carpet of beach morning glory and sea purslane. These ground-running plants are essential for island stability, as their intricate root systems anchor the sand in place and prevent the beach from washing away during heavy tides. However, you must be cautious when exploring these thickets. The littoral forest is home to poisonwood trees, like the chechum. A helpful rule to remember here is leaves of 3, let me be. These trees produce a sap that causes severe skin irritation, a natural defense mechanism in this competitive habitat. Amidst these plants, the fauna of the littoral zone is equally specialized. One of the most important yet misunderstood residents is the opossum. These animals are vital to the ecosystem because they are immune to most snake venoms and actively hunt poisonous snakes, keeping the local balance in check. The bird life in the littoral zone is a highlight for any observer, featuring species that you often won't find anywhere else in the country. For example, while the gray catbird is common on the mainland, the black catbird is a specialist that remains strictly along the coast and on the Keys. You might also spot the melodious blackbird, known for its beautiful songs, or the social flycatcher, the smallest of several similar-looking species.
During migration periods, the forest fills with warblers like the American redstart, where the males display striking red and black feathers, while the females show flashes of yellow. On the edges of the forest, the tropical kingbird is a frequent sight, perched high on electricity lines or road signs, scanning the ground for insects and small snakes. From the resilient, fruit-bearing sea grape to the specialized black catbird, the littoral zone is a bustling corridor of life, where every inhabitant has mastered the art of living on the edge of the sea.
Moving from the coastal forests into the shallow waters, we find ourselves in the sprawling prairies of the sea, the seagrass meadows. These are not merely underwater weeds, they are ancient species of flowering plants that have managed a remarkable evolutionary feat by returning to the ocean. While most plants evolved to thrive on land, seagrasses adapted to life entirely submerged in salty water nearly 100 million years ago, during the age of the dinosaurs. Today, they form a critical bridge in the marine landscape, linking coastal mangrove forests to the offshore coral reefs.
In Belize, the topography of the lagoon bottom often mirrors the mainland, creating vast, protected flats where these meadows can carpet the seafloor. One of the most vital services these meadows provide is their ability to act as a massive natural filtration system. As water moves from the mainland and down through the hills, it carries a heavy load of sediment and runoff toward the ocean. Seagrasses act as the first line of defense for the delicate coral reefs further out. Their long, blade-like leaves create a rough surface at the bottom of the lagoon, which physically slows down the flow of currents. As the water loses speed, the suspended sediments, bits of dirt and organic matter, drop out of the water column and settle into the grass. The complex network of roots and underground stems, known as rhizomes, then lock these sediments into the seafloor. This process keeps the water clear and prevents the coral reefs from being smothered by muddy runoff. Without this filtration, the turbidity of the water would skyrocket, blocking the sunlight that both the grass and the corals need to survive. Beyond filtering physical debris, seagrasses are phenomenal chemical filters and carbon sinks. They are often called the kidneys of the coast because of how efficiently they scrub the water of excess nutrients. For instance, a single hectare of seagrass can absorb as much nitrogen as would be found in the treated sewage of 800 people in a year. Perhaps even more impressively, they are global heavyweights in the fight against climate change. A square meter of seagrass can fix the same amount of carbon in a year as a car produces driving 7,500 miles. By capturing and storing this carbon in their tissues and the surrounding soil, they prevent it from entering the atmosphere as greenhouse gases. This makes seagrass meadows one of the most effective carbon sinks on the planet, proving that while they may be easily overlooked compared to the flashy coral reef, they are the silent engines driving the health and stability of the entire coastal environment.
When you look at a seagrass meadow from the surface, it might look like a simple underwater lawn, but if you look closer, you will find one of the most biologically complex ecosystems on the planet. These meadows serve as critical nursery grounds for a staggering variety of marine life, acting as a bridge between coastal mangroves and the offshore barrier reef. For many species, the seagrass is a sanctuary where they can spend their most vulnerable juvenile stages, finding both protection from predators and a constant supply of food. The diversity begins on a microscopic scale. Tiny species of algae grow directly on the blades of the grass, providing a primary food source for small grazing organisms. Living among these blades are millions of tiny creatures like isopods and amphipods. While they are barely visible to the naked eye, they are essential to the food web, eventually being eaten by shorebirds or larger fish. You will also find more specialized invertebrates like the queen conch and various species of sea snails, such as the smooth genella or the colorful flamingo tongue, which cling to the vegetation. The dense, swaying blades of grass create a labyrinth that is perfect for hiding. Juvenile reef fish, including snappers and grunts, take up temporary residence here. The seagrass provides a physical barrier that larger predators find difficult to penetrate. For example, groups of grunts often school near the reef during the day for safety, but disperse over the seagrass beds at night to hunt for invertebrates like shrimp and crabs.
This movement creates a vital nutrient link between the meadows and the coral structures. Beyond just small fish, the meadows support iconic species like the queen angelfish and the French angelfish. You will also find different types of parrotfish, such as the spotlight and spotted parrotfish, which are crucial for the health of the entire reef system. These fish start their lives in the safety of the grass before moving out to the reef where they perform the essential task of grazing on algae. Even larger marine mammals like the West Indian manatee and bottlenose dolphins are frequent visitors. Manatees are famous for grazing on these prairies of the sea, while dolphins use the abundance of fish in the meadows as a primary hunting ground. Other residents include sponges, hydroids, and encrusted bryozoans that attach themselves to the bottom or the blades themselves. The sheer variety of life is what makes the seagrass meadow a biodiversity hotspot. Without these nurseries, the populations of the Belize Barrier Reef would struggle to replenish themselves. The meadows ensure that the next generation of marine life has a safe place to grow, highlighting just how interconnected the coast and the deep blue truly are. Despite their immense value, seagrasses are often called the Rodney Dangerfield of coastal ecosystems. They simply don't get the respect they deserve. While coral reefs and tropical rainforests frequently make headlines, seagrasses are declining at a staggering rate of nearly 7% per year. This loss is actually occurring faster than the destruction of those more famous icons. The crisis is not a distant threat for the next century. It is happening right now, driven largely by human activities along our coastlines. As human populations swell near the water's edge, the pressure on these prairies of the sea reaches a breaking point. One of the most significant impacts comes from coastal development and land use. When we clear mangroves to build marinas or replace natural shorelines with concrete seawalls, we strip away the filters that keep our oceans healthy. Without these natural buffers, stormwater runoff from coastal communities flows directly into the sea, carrying sediments, pollutants, and excessive nutrients like nitrogen. In a healthy system, a single hectare of seagrass can process the nitrogen equivalent of treated sewage from 800 people. However, when runoff becomes overwhelming, the water becomes turbid and cloudy. Because seagrasses are flowering plants that require high levels of sunlight to photosynthesize, this murky water essentially starves them of the energy they need to survive. Direct physical damage also plays a destructive role. In popular recreational areas, boat grabbings and propeller scarring tear through the meadows, leaving deep gashes in the seabed. These injuries are particularly devastating because seagrasses cannot easily grow back into an empty water column. They require a stable bed of sediment to take root. Without intervention, these scars can take decades to recover, or they may never heal at all, leading to localized erosion that further destabilizes the surrounding meadow. In places like Biscayne National Park, resource managers are forced to resort to complex restoration efforts, such as using cranes to lower burlap bags of sediment into these scars and having divers carefully transplant healthy grass to jumpstart the healing process. If we allow these habitats to continue their global decline, the result could be a total ecosystem collapse. Because seagrasses serve as the foundation of the food chain and the primary nursery for countless species, their disappearance ripples upward. The fisheries we rely on for food, the tourism industries that depend on clear water, and the marine mammals like manatees and dolphins that hunt and forage in these beds would all face catastrophic losses. We are essentially losing a massive carbon sink and a natural water treatment plant at a time when we need them most. Protecting what remains requires more than just science. It requires a shift in how we value these underwater meadows before the damage becomes irreversible. The Belize Barrier Reef stands as one of the most remarkable natural wonders on our planet. Stretched along the coast like a vibrant living belt, it holds the title of the largest barrier reef in the northern and western hemispheres. While the Great Barrier Reef in Australia is the only one larger in total size, the Belizean Reef is uniquely significant and remains a crown jewel of global biodiversity. It is so massive and distinct that it is one of the only living features on Earth visible from outer space. Its location is crucial. Situated in the warm, clear, subtropical waters between 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south of the equator, it enjoys the perfect environmental conditions for coral life to flourish.
To understand the reef today, we have to look back at the colossal geological forces that shaped the region. The foundation of this system was influenced by prehistoric events, including a massive meteor impact in the nearby Yucatan Peninsula millions of years ago. This event, combined with the slow, powerful movement of tectonic plates, like the Caribbean Plate, created the underwater limestone platforms and ridges that provided a base for the reef. However, the living reef we see today is a relatively recent addition to the Earth's history. During the ice ages of the Pleistocene epoch, the planet was much colder, and sea levels were hundreds of feet lower than they are today. Corals are highly sensitive to temperature and cannot survive in the icy waters of a glacial period. It was only about 5,000 to 8,000 years ago, as the last ice age ended and the oceans warmed, that the reef began its modern growth. As the glaciers melted and sea levels rose, the corals grew upward, layer by layer, keeping pace with the rising water to stay within reach of the sun's life-giving light. At its heart, the Belize Barrier Reef is not a static rock formation, but a complex, living underwater ecosystem. It is frequently compared to a tropical rainforest because of its incredible abundance and diversity. Within its structures, 74 different species of coral have been identified. Of these, 65 are reef builders, acting as the primary architects that secrete the limestone skeletons forming the reef's massive bulk. This living architecture provides a home to more than 4,000 species of fish and countless marine invertebrates. The energy in this system is tightly bound within the living organisms themselves, creating a symbiotic web where every creature plays a vital role. It functions as a self-repairing breakwater, protecting the coastline of Belize from the force of the ocean while acting as a biological engine for the entire Caribbean. It is a place of endless variety, where the sheer density of life makes it one of the most essential habitats on Earth. To truly understand the majesty of the Belize Barrier Reef, we have to look closer at the tiny organisms that build these massive structures. A coral reef is not just a collection of rocks. It is a vibrant, living underwater ecosystem built by small, disc-shaped animals called polyps. Each polyp is a relatively simple creature with a stomach, a mouth, and a ring of tentacles, but they are masters of engineering. These polyps are joined together by connecting tissue to form colonies, and as they grow, they secrete a hard skeleton of calcium carbonate or limestone. This process is incredibly slow, with reef-building corals growing only about 1 inch per year. To put that in perspective, while it takes hundreds of years for just a centimeter of soil to form, the coral is slightly faster but still requires centuries to create the towering formations we see today. The biology of a polyp is fascinating. They have an outer layer called the epidermis, much like plants do, and an internal gastrodermis that produces digestive juices. Their tentacles are equipped with specialized stinging cells that they use for tentacular feeding. At night, these tentacles extend to catch microscopic organisms like zooplankton and meroplankton, the tiny larval stages of shrimp and crabs floating in the current. In Belize, we find 74 different species of hard corals, and 65 of these are considered reef builders. You can often identify them by their distinctive shapes, which frequently mimic objects on land. For example, the staghorn coral looks like the antlers of a deer, while the elkhorn coral features broad, flat branches. There are star corals with patterns like tiny celestial bodies, and brain corals that look remarkably like the folds of a human brain. We also see lettuce corals that resemble leafy greens and finger corals that look like outstretched hands. Beyond the hard reef-building varieties, there are about 36 species of soft corals, often called gorgonians. These include sea fans and sea plumes, which lack a heavy limestone skeleton. Instead, they are flexible and move gracefully with the ocean currents, looking almost like underwater trees or feathers. The secret to the survival of these corals lies in a complex symbiotic relationship with microscopic algae called zooxanthellae. These algae live directly inside the coral tissue.
Through photosynthesis, the algae use sunlight to produce energy and nutrients, which they share with the coral. In exchange, the polyp provides the algae with a protected home and the carbon dioxide it needs to grow. This partnership is why corals require very specific conditions to thrive: clear, warm water, a stable salinity of about 35 parts per thousand, and plenty of sunlight. Without this delicate biological balance, the entire reef structure would cease to grow, threatening the thousands of fish species that call these coral cathedrals home. Understanding the different shapes and structures of coral reefs is like learning the geography of an underwater kingdom. While all reefs are built by tiny polyps, they arrange themselves into distinct categories based on their relationship with the land and the depth of the water. In Belize, we are home to the most iconic examples of these formations, starting with the grandest of all, the barrier reef. A barrier reef is defined by its scale and its distance from the shore. It acts as a massive, self-repairing breakwater that runs parallel to the coastline, separated from the mainland by a deep lagoon. This lagoon creates a protected environment where the water is calmer, providing a buffer between the open Caribbean Sea and the coast. The Belize Barrier Reef is the largest in the Western Hemisphere, and its geological complexity includes features like the reef crest, which takes the brunt of the ocean's energy, and the buttress zone that slopes down into the deep. Moving closer to the shore, we find fringing reefs. As the name suggests, these reefs grow in a narrow band right along the edge of the land. They are the most common type of reef worldwide and are particularly important for coastal protection because they are the first line of defense against wave action for beaches and coastal communities. Unlike barrier reefs, there is no significant lagoon separating a fringing reef from the shore. Then, scattered throughout the lagoons, like islands of biodiversity, we have patch reefs. These are isolated clumps of coral that grow independently of the main reef structures. They don't form long, continuous lines, but rather individual mounds or patches that rise from the lagoon floor. They are often hotspots for snorkelers because they can be found in shallower, calmer waters and are teeming with concentrated life. Finally, Belize is home to rare formations called atolls. An atoll is an encircling ring of coral reef that surrounds a central lagoon, often appearing like a circle in the middle of the deep ocean. We are incredibly lucky to have 3 major atolls: Turn F, Lighthouse Reef, and Glover's Reef, each providing unique habitats that are entirely surrounded by the open sea. For any of these structures to thrive, however, very specific environmental conditions must be met. Coral health is a delicate balance. First, because corals live in a symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae algae that photosynthesize, they require shallow, clear water so that sunlight can penetrate. If the water becomes too turbid or cloudy due to sediment runoff from rivers or coastal development, the corals can essentially suffocate or lose their ability to produce food. Temperature is equally critical. Corals are the Goldilocks of the ocean. They cannot survive in water that is too cold, but they are also highly sensitive to overheating. Ideal temperatures hover around 74 degrees Fahrenheit. When the water gets too warm for too long, corals experience bleaching, where they expel their life-sustaining algae. Salinity must also be stable, typically around 35 parts per thousand. Finally, a healthy reef needs a low-nutrient environment. While it sounds counterintuitive, too many nutrients, like those from fertilizer runoff, encourage the growth of fleshy algae that can overgrow and smother the slow-growing coral polyps. This is why herbivorous fish, like the parrotfish, are so vital. They act as the reef's gardeners, grazing away the algae and keeping the limestone surface clean for new coral larvae to attach and grow. The reality of our changing climate brings us to a critical crossroads where the health of our oceans and the stability of our coastlines are under direct threat. Scientists and researchers have observed that sea level rise is no longer a slow, steady process. It is accelerating at a rate that challenges the resilience of every coastal habitat we have explored. This acceleration is driven by global climate change and the enrichment of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, which impacts everything from the temperature of the water to its chemical acidity. In low-lying regions and island chains like those found in Belize, this shift could eventually mean the total disappearance of landmasses as we know them. Historically, a modest rate of sea level rise allowed features like barrier islands, bays, and estuaries to develop over thousands of years. However, the current pace is now outstripping the ability of natural systems, such as oyster reefs and mangrove forests, to grow upward and keep pace with the water. One of the most pressing concerns for the future is how human intervention might inadvertently worsen these effects. As the seas rise, seagrasses and mangroves naturally attempt to migrate shoreward to stay in their ideal depth and soil conditions. If humans continue to armor the coast by building concrete seawalls and massive developments right at the water's edge, these vital ecosystems will have nowhere to go. They will be trapped between the rising tide and the man-made wall, leading to a squeeze that could result in an ecosystem collapse from the bottom of the food chain upward. In Belize, the stakes are incredibly high because the natural environment is the foundation of the national economy. While agriculture is a collective powerhouse, tourism is the single largest individual industry. Protecting the reef and the coastal forests is therefore an economic necessity as much as an environmental one. This realization led to the implementation of the Blue Bond, a landmark conservation effort that stands as a model for the world. This financial agreement allowed the country to restructure its national debt in exchange for a binding, long-term commitment to marine protection. The Blue Bond is designed to ensure that the natural environment remains intact, focusing on keeping rivers and coastal waters free from the runoff and industrial pollution that choke coral reefs and seagrass beds.
Conservation is about safeguarding the oxygen we breathe and the natural breakwaters that protect our homes from hurricane surges. We are the current stewards of the Western Hemisphere's largest barrier reef, but that title requires active protection against human-induced threats. As we look ahead, the choices made regarding the Blue Bond and coastal development will determine the legacy we leave behind. We must recognize that if we do not protect these habitats now, our children's children will not be as lucky as we are to witness the vibrant life of the coast.